Outer Banks Season 5 Explained Ending, JJ, Groff, Blue Crown, and Final Fate. Warning: major spoilers for the entire Outer Banks Season 5. The fifth and final season is now streaming, and it gives the Pogues a much more emotional ending than another simple treasure hunt. JJ remains dead, Chandler Groff becomes the target of Kiara's revenge, the Blue Crown drives the final adventure, and the series ultimately gives John B., Sarah, Kiara, Pope, Cleo, and Rafe their own endings. So, what actually happens in Outer Banks Season 5? After 4 seasons of treasure hunts, betrayals, near-death experiences, and impossible escapes, the Pogues finally reach the end of their story. But Season 5 begins in the darkest possible place. JJ Maybank is dead. He was murdered by his biological father, Chandler Groff, after JJ found the legendary Blue Crown in Morocco. Groff escaped with the crown, leaving the Pogues devastated and determined to find him. Netflix describes Season 5 as the group's final journey, with JJ's death becoming the emotional foundation of the story. And that changes the Pogues completely. For years, they were teenagers chasing treasure because it was exciting. Now they're chasing Groff because they want revenge. JJ's death changes everything. JJ was always the wildest member of the group. He was reckless. He was funny. He was loyal. And despite all the terrible things that happened to him, he continued to think of the Pogues as his real family. His death, therefore, isn't treated as something the group can simply move past. Especially for Kiara. She loved JJ, and she watched him die. So Season 5 gives Kiara a very different purpose. She isn't interested in treasure anymore. She wants Chandler Groff. And the entire group eventually joins her in the hunt. Rudy Panko doesn't return as a regular cast member in Season 5, although JJ's presence continues through memories, flashbacks, and the emotional impact he leaves behind. That's important because the season isn't trying to pretend JJ never existed. Quite the opposite. JJ is the reason the final adventure happens. What happened to Groff? After killing JJ, Groff escapes with the Blue Crown. That makes him the central target of the final season. But Groff isn't simply running away. He's trying to sell or exploit the crown while staying ahead of the Pogues and the various criminals hunting him. The Pogues eventually track him across different locations as their search becomes increasingly dangerous. Meanwhile, Rafe Cameron becomes unexpectedly important. Rafe has spent most of the series fighting against the Pogues. But by Season 5, circumstances force him into an uneasy alliance with them. And this becomes one of the most surprising character developments of the final season. Rafe isn't suddenly a completely different person, but he begins making choices that show he's capable of putting other people ahead of himself. His relationship with Sarah also changes. For years, Sarah and Rafe have been trapped in a toxic family dynamic. But Season 5 finally gives them an opportunity to confront their past. Does Kiara get revenge for JJ? Yes. Kiara's entire Season 5 storyline is built around the question of whether she can finally make Groff pay. She is consumed by anger after JJ's death, and the other Pogues worry that revenge could destroy her. But eventually, she gets the confrontation she has been waiting for. Groff's actions finally catch up with him, and Kiara gets her revenge. The important part, though, is that Season 5 doesn't portray revenge as a simple victory. Kiara gets justice for JJ, but it doesn't bring JJ back. She still has to live with his absence. That becomes one of the major emotional themes of the finale. Revenge can end the person who caused your pain, but it can't erase the pain itself. What happens with the Blue Crown? The Blue Crown is one of the biggest mysteries of the final season. It's not simply another treasure. The legend surrounding it suggests that it possesses an extraordinary power connected to resurrection. And that creates a huge question. Could the Blue Crown bring JJ back? This becomes one of the emotional possibilities hanging over the Pogues. After losing JJ, Kiara naturally wants to believe that there might be some way to undo what happened. But Season 5 ultimately uses the crown less as a magical solution and more as a symbol of the Pogues' inability to let go. They've spent their entire lives chasing impossible things. Treasures, legends, lost cities, gold. The crown gives them one final impossible dream. But the story ultimately has to decide whether they can accept reality. And that's why JJ's death remains meaningful. The show doesn't simply use magic to erase the consequences. Instead, the Pogues eventually have to move forward without him. What happens to John B. and Sarah? John B. and Sarah's story gets one of the happiest endings. At the beginning of the season, they're still dealing with the chaos surrounding JJ's death and Groff. But their relationship continues to grow stronger. And there is a major development. Sarah is pregnant. That changes the stakes for John B. For years, his life has revolved around his father, treasure hunting, and survival. Now he has another future to think about, a family of his own. And by the end of the series, John B. and Sarah are able to move toward a more peaceful life. Their story comes full circle. John B. began the series searching for his missing father. He spent years chasing treasure and danger. But ultimately, his greatest discovery isn't gold. It's family. What happens to Pope and Cleo? Pope and Cleo also get a satisfying ending. Their relationship has always been one of the more grounded romances in the series. They understand each other's backgrounds and have repeatedly protected one another. By the end, they are able to imagine a future beyond constant danger. They've survived treasure hunts, criminals, betrayals, and international adventures. And now they can finally choose something different. Their ending reinforces the larger theme of Season 5. The Pogues don't need another treasure. They need a life. What happens to Rafe? Rafe arguably gets one of the biggest redemption arcs. At the beginning of the series, he was one of the Pogues' most dangerous enemies. He was violent, unpredictable, and responsible for enormous damage to his own family. But Season 5 gives him an opportunity to change. His alliance with the Pogues forces him to confront who he has been. And his relationship with Sarah becomes particularly important. He finally starts to understand the damage his actions caused. Rafe doesn't magically become perfect, but he does something that would have been almost impossible for him to do earlier in the series. He chooses other people over himself. And that's why his ending feels like a redemption rather than a complete transformation. What about the Pogues' treasure? This is another important part of the finale. After everything they've gone through, the Pogues finally realize something. They don't actually need to spend the rest of their lives chasing treasure. They have already found the thing that mattered most: each other. That's been the underlying theme of the entire show. The Pogues constantly lose money. They lose houses. They lose boats. They lose treasure. They lose people. But their friendship keeps bringing them back together. JJ's death makes that theme even stronger. Because now the group has to accept that one of their members won't be coming back. The treasure can't fix that. The blue crown can't necessarily fix that. Only time can. Why is the ending so emotional? Because Outer Banks began as a story about teenagers who thought they had everything to prove. John B. wanted to find his father. JJ wanted freedom from his abusive home life. Kiara wanted to escape the expectations placed on her. Pope wanted to prove himself. Sarah wanted to escape her family. Cleo wanted a future beyond survival. They were all searching for something. But after 5 seasons, they finally realized that the Real adventure was growing up together. Season 5, therefore, isn't just about solving another mystery. It's about letting go of adolescence. JJ's death represents the end of the group's innocence. The Pogues can't simply return to the way things were. They've lost someone. They've experienced real consequences. And now they have to build lives beyond treasure hunting. That's why the finale feels different from earlier seasons. The characters finally get to imagine adulthood. What happens to the Pogues in the future? The finale gives the characters a sense of where their lives are going. John B. and Sarah move toward becoming parents. Pope and Cleo build a future together. Kiara carries JJ's memory forward. Rafe finally moves away from the destructive path that defined his younger years. And the group remains connected even as their lives begin moving in different directions. That's important. The show isn't saying the Pogues will stay together forever in exactly the same way. They're growing up. Their lives are changing. But the friendship that created the group remains. And that is ultimately the real ending of Outer Banks. So, what does Outer Banks Season 5 really mean? At first glance, Season 5 is another treasure hunt. The Pogues chase the Blue Crown. They run from criminals. They fight Groff. They travel across countries. They survive impossible situations. But underneath all of that, Season 5 is about loss and growing up. JJ's death forces everyone to confront the fact that their adventures have consequences. Kiara has to learn that revenge won't bring her boyfriend back. John B has to think about becoming a father. Sarah has to think about building a family. Pope and Cleo have to imagine a future beyond survival. And Rafe has to decide whether he wants to remain the person he used to be. The Blue Crown becomes almost symbolic. For years, the Pogues believed the next treasure would solve everything. But by the end, they understand that treasure was never the real prize. Their friendship was. And perhaps that's why JJ's death is so important. He may not physically be there for the final adventure, but his memory is woven through the entire season. The Pogues don't forget him. They don't replace him. They simply learn how to continue living without him. And that's what makes the ending emotional. The final meaning of Outer Banks. For 5 seasons, the Pogues chase legends. But the final season asks them to stop chasing the past and start building the future. John B and Sarah are preparing to become parents. Pope and Cleo have their future ahead of them. Kiara survives her grief. Rafe finally begins changing. And JJ's memory remains part of all of them. The treasure hunts are over. The Pogue War is no longer the center of their lives. And the Pogues finally have something they spent the entire series trying to find. A future. That's the real ending of Outer Banks. Not the Blue Crown. Not the gold. Not another legendary treasure. The Pogues growing up without forgetting where they came from. And after 7 years, 5 seasons, and countless impossible escapes, that's where the story finally ends. The treasure hunt is over. The Pogues story is complete. But their friendship and the memory of JJ Maybank is what survives.